Hello students. Let's start with our another video on respiration. What is respiration? When the simple digested food material like glucose is taken in and then it is broken down and it releases energy. This process is known as respiration. Respiration is about breaking down of simple digested food. That means it is a catabolic process. Whereas photosynthesis is anabolic process where energy is absorbed in the form of solar energy and carbon dioxide and water will form glucose and oxygen. Respiration is catabolic, whereas photosynthesis is anabolic. Respiration is the reversible reaction of photosynthesis. In this image, you can see how the mitochondria and chloroplast is showing a reversible type of reaction. In mitochondria, the respiration take place and you can see the energy in the form of ATP. This is the usable form of energy which is known as adenosine triphosphate. It is formed in mitochondria in presence of oxidative enzyme. Glucose breaks down into carbon dioxide and water. This carbon dioxide and water will be taken up and will be used for preparing glucose and oxygen by the process of photosynthesis in presence of sunlight and chlorophyll. So you can see how the plant cells and animal cells, they are interrelated to each other. Photosynthesis take place during daytime, whereas respiration take place both in the daytime and the night. Coming to our next slide, type of respiration. There are two types of respiration, aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Let's focus on the term aerobic. The word aero refers to air, and in the air we have 21% of oxygen approximately. In aerobic respiration, in the presence of oxygen, glucose breaks down into carbon dioxide and water and releases energy in the form of ATP. Oxidative enzymes and mitochondria play an important role in aerobic respiration. Whereas in anaerobic respiration, anaerobic means in absence of air or in absence of oxygen. In this process, glucose breaks down into ethanol and carbon dioxide in absence of oxygen and releases energy in the form of ATP. Now, let's move on to the next slide. Here we can see glucose, which has 6 carbon containing molecule, and this glucose breaks down in cytoplasm. The process of glucose breakdown is known as glycolysis. I repeat, the process by which the glucose breaks down is known as glycolysis. The glucose breaks down into 2-pyruvate. Pyruvate has 3 carbon molecule. So, whenever the glucose breaks down, that means it is a catabolic process, and during catabolic process, energy is released. So during glycolysis in the cytoplasm, glucose breaks down into 2-pyruvate and energy is released. This pyruvate now depends on the basis of presence and absence of oxygen. This further gives rise to particular type of product. In the first, you can see the pyruvate when there is absence of oxygen. That means it is anaerobic respiration takes place in the yeast cell, and they will release ethanol, carbon dioxide and energy. The pyruvate in the lack of oxygen will release lactic acid and energy. This condition generally take place when we are running or when we are doing some extreme exercises and in our body we feel lack of oxygen. At that time, we need urgency in the energy. and that urgent form of energy will be produced where the pyruvate will break down into lactic acid and energy. So due to lack of oxygen, lactic acid and energy will be produced from pyruvate. During the presence of oxygen, this pyruvate breaks down into carbon dioxide, water and energy. In aerobic respiration, the amount of energy is much higher as compared to anaerobic respiration. Now, let's move on to the next slide. We can see there is muscle cramps. Now, what are these muscle cramps? During extreme exercise or running, we may feel shortage of oxygen. Shortage of oxygen means lack of oxygen. During that time, we need an urgency in the energy, and this pyruvate breaks down into lactic acid. This lactic acid leads to muscle cramps. After that, now let's move on to the next slide. We were discussing about the currency of energy. What is the currency of energy? Yes, it is adenosine triphosphate. And this ATP is formed in mitochondria. ATP formation is known as phosphorylation. So this is a new term for all of you. What is phosphorylation? The process of ATP formation is known as phosphorylation. ATP is the energy currency and they are mainly used for various cellular processes. This ATP will be formed through ADP and the ADP comes from AMP. Let's see the flow chart. AMP, full form is adenosine monophosphate, that adds with inorganic phosphate IP, that is a single phosphate that attaches with the monophosphate. So now there will be two phosphate. So that is known as adenosine diphosphate. So what do you mean by di? Di means two phosphate. Adenosine diphosphate. And this adenosine diphosphate attaches with another inorganic phosphate and now it will form ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And this process of ATP formation is known as phosphorylation, where IP stands for inorganic phosphate. Endothermic processes where we need to absorb the energy and this energy is absorbed in the form of ATP. Each ATP releases 30.5 kilojoule per mole. ATP can be used in the cells for the contraction of muscles, protein synthesis, conduction of nerve impulses, and many other activities.